I'll just open it up. I figured that I'll just open it up then for people if they have any questions. So I'll kind of run through this PowerPoint, and I don't know if like if people have a question, if they type something in, is that something that's going to pop up that like you'll see?
Yeah, we'll see a little chat thing pop up.
Okay.
You can answer those as they come in.
So yeah, if you see something or you have a question, if you type in a little thing or something, I'll stop and answer your question, because again, I think we don't have a real huge group here, so it can be pretty informal. So anyway, so this is my book, yeah, An Alaska Flyfisher's Odyssey. And I guess the very first thing I'd like to do is give a big shout out to my wife, Gwen. Gwen is an Athabascan Indian. She does a lot of traditional beadwork. And so the cover of that book is her beadwork of a beaded rainbow trout. It's on moose hide. That's actually, basically, I had her do a full size piece that was going to be the same size as the cover of the book. So the photo that makes up the book's cover is basically kind of true to size of her beadwork on that moose hide with porcupine quill accents. I definitely wanted this book to look like something that was genuinely and uniquely Alaskan. So I'm really happy with how her beadwork came out. But anyway, so start trying to click through the thing here and see if it works. Okay, so Seeking a Life of Drag-Free Drift in the Land of the Midnight Sun. That's the subtitle for the book, and I'll talk a little bit more about this drag-free drift thing as we go on. So I say, what's the book about? I'll start out by just saying, this isn't a how-to, where-to book, okay? It's not, okay, this is the stream you have to go to at this time of year with this type of fly pattern to catch this certain type of fish. This is more of an examination of what it's like to be of living life as a fly fisherman, particularly in the far north. I talk a lot about what it's like to live year-round in Alaska. I talk about, whether the fishing is as good up here as people think. For the most part, it is, with some caveats that we might get into. I talk a lot about how being raised as a fly fisherman, how that has affected other areas of my life, the things that kind of I apply from fly fishing to other parts of my life. And I kind of wrap up talking about taking stock of what are you grateful for, kind of acknowledging all those people that help you along the way, et cetera, et cetera. So it might be a little zen-y for some type of people, I don't know, but like I say, it's a lot more than just about fishing. Just as importantly, like I say, what is this book not? It's not, again, a how-to, where-to type book. As I said, let's see, is this thing working? Okay, like I said, there's a lot of good geographical kind of reference information in there. I talk about different, areas of the state, or what I call special regions and things like that. For some reason, when I'm swiping, it's not like forward in the bullet, the little bullet points. Is it this one?
Clicker.
Okay, it takes me a little bit to get this stuff. So like I say, I do highlight some special regions of the state. I do talk about maybe a few specific patterns here and there, but for the most part, like I say, this isn't meant to be a guidebook to go fly fishing in Alaska. I divide the book into 4 sections. The first part is basically called The Seasons of Alaska, and that's exactly what it says. Is it's the first 4 chapters are looking at the 4 seasons in Alaska. Start out talking about winter, and just about all these slides that are in this presentation are pictures that I've taken, and that they're pictures that are in the book. But talking about winter, I talk about all the beauty, that we see here in Fairbanks, but also a lot of the frustration of being an avid stream fly fisherman and spending 7 months a year, basically in below zero weather, looking at snow and ice and things like that, and dreaming about what's going to come in the summer. Spring comes, of course, everybody's familiar with kind of how quick spring comes, how quick the green up happens. That's looking out my window, I think, on green up day. And then moving into summer, that's obviously, kind of our fly fishing bread and butter up here, dealing with the beautiful scenery, traveling around the state, catching lake trout, catching rainbows, catching grayling, etc. And just, that's kind of what I live for up here. And then moving into the fall, which again is really kind of bittersweet. Some of the fall fisheries are to me, the most striking and some of the most beautiful fishing I do up here, both here locally, like our local grayling water, also down like fishing in Katmai. That's some of the best rainbow fishing is in that mid to late fall time. But again, it's bittersweet. With the fall comes, it's like, that winter's coming again, and it's time to kind of go through that whole cycle again. Part 2 of the book is what I would call my fishing autobiography. I start out talking about my childhood, down in Colorado. I lived there till I was 12 years old, and talking about the influence of family. So there's a lot of Colorado history that kind of backs up that part of the book. That picture there is just from this last fall fishing down on the Gunnison, which is real close to where my parents have retired back down to. But a lot of this family stuff, that's like that first picture that popped up is me with my brothers and sisters as little kids fishing. The one over on the left there, the top part of that is my father and my grandfather on the Lake Fork of the Gunnison back in the early 40s. And then that's me and my dad on that same stretch of stream just a couple of years ago. Learning to fish lakes with my grandfather down there. And then my brother and I, fishing together. I spent an awful lot of time running around with my older brother, Dave, learning to fish in Colorado before we moved to Alaska. When it comes right down to it, like I say, a lot of this book is basically a big heartfelt thank you to my mom, who's herself an excellent fly fisherman and somebody that I love to fish with every chance she gets, and my dad, who huge influence on my life and who, is just, he raised me to be a fisherman, and I am who I am because of my mom and my dad. The third part of the book is called Life in Its Most Special of Places. And in this section of the book, I kind of bounce back and forth between what I call my philosophical chapters and my regional chapters. Those regional chapters, I talk about, Fairbanks and the interior grayling home water that I like to fish. Talk a lot about Katmai down in Southwest Alaska. Talk about the Kenai Peninsula, which I go down and fish with my good friend Glenn quite a bit. And again, so like talking about my grayling home water here in the interior, I always try not to name any of my specific rivers or places that I fish. But most people that are local here, when they're reading through my descriptions, they'll probably figure out pretty quickly where I'm talking about. Again, going down to the Kenai, I do a lot of fishing down there. Try to avoid the salmon crowds. Usually when the salmon fisheries are in full swing, my buddy Glenn and I are hiking to the upper reaches of those drainages, targeting the rainbows and the dollies that tend to follow the salmon up. And then Katmai, which I guided down there in college, and it's been a big part of my life here in Alaska. I continue to go out to Katmai basically every chance I get because the fishing out there is just extraordinary, and I think it's kind of the crown jewel of Alaska. Again, that alternates with what I call the philosophical chapters, where I'm looking at different life components. I talk about how fly fishing kind of transfers over, how I deal with friendships. That's my good buddy Glenn, fishing down in the American. A real good buddy of mine from the police department, Randy Coffey. That's actually up on the Sheenjack. I was talking about flying into the upper Sheenjack on a moose hunt up there. My good friend Rich Meyer, who I do a lot of snow machining with in the wintertime. I apply a lot of things from the world of fly fishing to how I kind of deal with and manage my friendships. Talk about work-life balance. Again, I spent 20 years with the Fairbanks Police Department. I retired as chief there in 2009. Had a great police career. Talk very little, almost hardly at all, about anything police related in the book, because basically once I was done being a cop, I was basically done being a cop, and I wanted to concentrate on important things like fishing. Marriage was one of the more interesting components of writing this book, where I talk about how I deal with certain aspects of marriage and how a lot of that, I guess I take analogies from the world of fly fishing to how I deal with my wife, Gwen, some of which she probably agrees with, some of which she probably doesn't. So just a couple of quick examples I'll throw out there. Like when I'm talking about my fly fishing orientation in chapter 9, I compare my friendships like to all the different flies I have in my different fly boxes. I have I have a lot of tried and true favorites that I constantly go back to. I have a very few of these really trusted, what I call my go-to patterns. That's kind of how I view my best friends. They're like these true blue go-to trusted patterns that I wouldn't want to stay away from or veer from. And then, like say, there's always those couple of patterns that I have no idea how they got there, how they ended up in my box. There's always a few people like that in your life as well, that sometimes they're there, I guess, kind of for comic relief or whatever. But I always try to say, don't discard anybody needlessly, and you can usually learn something from just about anybody. The other example I kind of like to bring up is, again, this analogy with marriage. So I use the dry dropper rig as a good analogy for marriage. And I ask people, do you know what fly you are? So for all the non-anglers, which probably isn't a whole lot of people in this audience, but I spent some time, explaining what is a dry dropper rig. You have that highly buoyant dry fly that you're basically using as an indicator. you got a small nymph or something else, suspended beneath. Sometimes a fish might come up and take that indicator. More often than not, you're going to end up taking your fish on that nymph beneath. So how could that possibly relate to marriage? Well, there's all these different problem areas you can run into. And so some of the analogies I talk about, if you're using a dry fly of insufficient buoyancy, it might not be as pretty and dainty as some of the others you'd see in the fly shop, but you want a fly that's going to float and remain buoyant and get that job done. That dry has to continue to do its job, even if it's not the one, quote unquote, getting all the action. But at any given time, that dry suddenly might find itself being the primary target of things. So it should be prepared to fulfill its role. And I kind of see that oftentimes in marriages, I think, where one partner might be out doing very visible stuff while the other person's kind of toiling behind the scenes. But it doesn't mean that one role is necessarily as important or less important than the other. Another problem using a dropper that's too much of a lightweight. I talk about, you need to make sure that your dropper is holding at the right depth. And that if you have a dropper that's just floating around, but not really down there doing the job, that does a big disservice to that indicator up top. Similarly, if you use a dropper that's too heavy, that's just as problematic. Not only may it be constantly getting snagged up down below, but it might end up dragging its partner down unnecessarily. So again, there's a lot of kind of subtle stuff about communication with your partner, making sure that you're both fulfilling your roles, I guess, equally or out of necessity to make sure that you're getting done what you want to do. Complicating the rig with unnecessary weight kind of speaks for itself. They say the difference between a good fisherman and a great fisherman is, oftentimes a single split shot. If you use a properly weighted rig, everything seems to go along a lot better. If you try to start adding extra split shot and doing too much, all of a sudden you can end up with a bunch of extra tangles and problems. And so I always try to keep those unnecessary exterior elements to a minimum, same which goes with marriage, which brings us to the last problem area. I say trying to introduce a third fly into the mix. Nothing further needs to be said there. That's probably going to be a big problem. So again, crucial points to remember, that I bring about in that analogy is, again, no matter who's more visible, each partner in that dry dropper rig is equally important. One partner's success often depends on the very different characteristics and attributes of, that companion fly. And one partner's apparent dominance or relative success rate isn't a true reflection of each member's respective contribution. There's been a lot of times where I fished all day using a dry dropper rig, and I've caught 95+% of my fish on that nymph underneath, but I wouldn't have seen or picked up on any of those strikes if not for the action of that dropper up or the indicator up top. So again, you can't start getting egotistical and thinking, well, you're the one actually catching everything, so this other partner isn't as important. The last kind of the book that I'll talk about real quick is really gets into the examination of what I call this whole drag-free drift analogy. And again, for the people who are experienced fly fishermen here, they immediately know what I'm talking about when I'm talking about drag-free drift. You got your fish sitting in the stream, all their food is coming along, drifting by with a very natural pace. And when you allow these unnatural external forces to either drag a fly forward, dragging a belly of your fly line forward, or holding your fly line back, creating that drag or that unnatural flow, the fish right away can tell there's something off with that fly. It's not moving at that same natural pace. And so they'll naturally avoid it and you won't have success. So as I say here, to achieve that drag-free drift, you're constantly having to mend your line and you're having to make those adjustments that will result in that drag-free drift. And I draw a very common analogy, I guess, with that and so many other components of my life, is that as you're kind of looking at how circumstances are unfolding and you're anticipating, how you're going to do in a new job, or as you move to a new house, or any number of changing circumstances, you have to kind of keep your eye on the flow that you're taking, and you may have to make adjustments here and there, and particularly ahead of time before you find yourself getting sucked down, into some draw where you're getting drawn down a run where you don't want to go, or you're getting held back at a pace that you don't want to be. It's just important to kind of keep an eye on things and be making those little adjustments so that you kind of keep your fly in that sweet spot, much the same way that you just kind of want to keep your own life, going along in that same sweet spot. And as I said, the final theme is just kind of one of gratitude, recognizing the persons and situations in your life that you've been blessed with. I've been in Fairbanks now for, almost 40 years. We love it up here. Again, there's a lot of limitations to the fly fisher for having to endure the winters and everything, but still given the people, given the environment, given the, Kevin and I just finished eating some moose hot dogs that I brought over that, every year get a moose, I'm dip netting and getting our salmon. You go down to Valdez and you get halibut and shrimp. There's not a lot of places, I think, in this country or in this world where you can eat the kind of organic diet that we're blessed with up here. And there's just a lot of, usually a lot of people and a lot of different things that have happened in one's life to kind of set you up for that kind of ideal circumstance. And I think it's important to let those people know the contribution that they've made to you. So I guess at that point, I'd ask, does anybody have any questions about this stuff? I'll let you turn on audio or whatever. And if people have questions about the book or about fishing in different sections of Alaska or anything else, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Cool. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah.
Anybody from the audience got anything? Otherwise, I got a couple for him.
Completely wowed them.
Yeah, they're speechless.
Yeah, Dan, thanks for your presentation. I was just wondering if you had any stories about like how the Fairbanks community or Alaska in general has kind of impacted that journey of being a fly fisherman, and then how you think as other people moving forward can continue to kind of build a community around fly fishing and help each other out.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'd say certainly for me, and I detail several different things kind of in my what I call my angler's development in the book. But for me, Fairbanks became a really important part of my life pretty early on. I was going to high school down in Anchorage, but I ended up coming up here in the summers and working for the Youth Conservation Corps program and the YCC camp. We ended up building a camp out on Chena Hot Springs Road at 30 Mile, which is the Twin Bears camp, if anybody's familiar with that. And I spent 3 of the probably best and most formative summers of my life in high school, working first as a crew member and then as a staff member at that YCC camp. And we built the Angel Rocks Trail, the Granite Torres Trail, the Chena Dome Trail. But in between building all those trails, spent a lot of time fishing that upper Chena and ended up making some pretty good friends and who ended up becoming mentors here in the Fairbanks community, particularly for grayling fishing and things like that. And it really kind of just brought a lot of things together for me. Having grown up as a kid in Colorado, I kind of identified with this Fairbanks climate and everything much more than I did with the Anchorage coastal climate. It's, a lot hotter and drier up here in the summers. I just felt a lot more comfortable here around Fairbanks. And so I'm proud to call myself now kind of a longtime Fairbanksan. I guess with that, the other thing I would say, and again, talking about having gratitude for the people that help you along the way, one of my best friend's dads was a Park Service administrator, again, while I'm in high school. And when I got back from one of those YCC summers, I had like 3 weeks left before I had to go back to school. And he came back from Katmai and said, hey, Brooks Lodge is needing some end of the season help out there because a lot of their staff are college kids that are heading back east to go back to school. I told the lodge manager that I knew you and that you'd be a good guy to go out there and work. Are you interested? And I said, absolutely. And that's what first got me out to Katmai. And I ended up working a couple seasons out at Brooks Lodge, which then led to me working as a fly fishing guide out at Kulik out in Katmai, which was really a life-changing experience for me. But again, it was all such by happenstance that my best friend's dad happened to come back from Katmai. He happened to know that, I was a wildlife biology major getting ready to go into college. So that's why he recommended me to go out there. But again, if I hadn't known him, I might have never gone out to Katmai and I would have never had any of those experiences. I would have probably never ended up as a fishing guide out there. So my whole life trajectory could have certainly changed. So I guess there's just, like I say, you never know those different people that you'll happen to run into and what kind of impact they'll have. I guess getting back to kind of the tail end of your question, how can that maybe contribute to kind of an ongoing fly fishing community here in Fairbanks, and what can we do? I can only say, first and foremost, I feel slightly guilty in that, for the majority of the time that I've been here in Fairbanks as an adult working at the police department, while I did a lot of fly fishing on my own, I don't want to say I was antisocial, but when I was on my own time, I pretty much just wanted to be on my own. And I've never been a big, I guess, a joiner of clubs and things like that. So I haven't really been super involved in the fly fishing club just really until this past couple of years. And I do think that there's a lot to be said for the fellowship and the mentorship that can be provided to young people who want to learn how to fish. I think it's really neat, you know, when I hear Kevin talking about, yeah, let's raise some money and get ready to host, developmental clinics in the summer for youth and things like that. Definitely got to get and keep more kids in the sport because, whenever I see somebody just sitting playing video games, I think, my gosh, why isn't this kid out on a stream somewhere, especially living here in Alaska instead of, sitting on a couch playing, Grand Theft Auto or something. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I guess I've rambled long enough on that one.
I think we forgot to mention that Dan's donating, was it 20% to
50%.
50% to Trout Unlimited for the sales of his book. So it's pretty cool that he's giving back, to the fishing community as well through what he's doing, which is pretty awesome. And so how did you kind of get inspired to write a book? Did you think about it for a while and just, I might have something here that people want to check out and then I can bring some knowledge to the table and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I've kind of wanted to write a book for a long time. I enjoy writing. Through my 20-year police career, I did a ton of writing, not just police reports and stuff, but I also did a fair amount of freelance writing for law enforcement publications, Police Magazine, Law and Order, 911, a lot of technical stuff and a lot of, police related stuff. But I enjoy writing. I enjoy kind of putting my thoughts together and putting something down. And my wife for the longest time had said, you should really write a book. Once you retire, you should write a book. But when it came down to it, when I thought about when it comes to writing a book, I didn't really want to write something unless it was personal and really meant something to me. And I didn't want to write a cop book or a crime related book because, again, once I was done with that career, I pretty much wanted to be done with it. And the more I thought about my life and different things and how I like to spend my time, I kept coming back to kind of this theme that there was so much in my life that how I dealt with things and how I'd learned and grown up as a fisherman and how that transferred over to other aspects of my life, that the more I thought about it, I thought, this is the one thing that I actually think I could write about and that I could actually organize and basically come up with a whole book about. And I'm pretty happy with how it came out. And so far, the people I know that have read it seem to like it. So I hope other people like it. As John said, I'm donating 50% of whatever I make to Alaska Trout Unlimited. So I'm really hoping that if people like it, they'll recommend it to friends and things like that. Just because I don't think I'm going to end up making hardly anything out of this venture when it's all said and done. But that's fine with me. It's like, if I can just get the message out there, and if Trout Unlimited can end up, making a good deal of bucks off the thing, I'll feel like that was a real, I guess, worthwhile endeavor, instead of, sitting home and watching TV or something. So
When you were, so all these stories is a lot of details to remember and everything. Do you kind of keep a journal to remember what you were doing, or are there like certain moments that just stood out you recall so well you didn't really necessarily have to chronicle everything?
Yeah, I've never been a journal keeper guy, and especially like a lot of the stuff from my younger childhood, I certainly never kept a journal diary there. But for good or bad, I think I have a pretty good memory, and especially when it comes to growing up hunting and fishing in Colorado, that to me was, what life was all about. And so those memories are all and continue to be extraordinarily vivid to me. And so when I started thinking about certain things and say, well, I want to write about, fishing on the Gunnison or this experience in YCC or whatever, I can remember those and recall them and put them down. And it's, I guess, like I said, I would feel terrible, like for people who get Alzheimer's and things like that. It must be a horrible feeling to not be able to remember and recall stuff anymore. But I feel pretty blessed just by virtue of the fact that I can remember all of these very special moments, fishing with my mom and dad and brothers and sisters and everything.
Yeah, that's pretty impressive, your recall on some of those. I don't remember things from when I was that young, so that's cool. Any other questions from the crowd before I keep asking them here?
I think that your cover's really beautiful. I think it's
you.
uniquely Alaskan, and I absolutely love the beadwork with the porcupine quills. That's just really pretty cool to see something that uniquely Fairbanks Athabascan. It's really pretty cool. So great cover.
Hey, I really appreciate that comment, and I'll be sure when I get home to let my wife know that it's she's very, again, you get back into that whole dry dropper thing and who's out front and who's kind of behind the scenes. She's a pretty shy person, and she's, there's been several times where I've told her like, hey, I've got a book signing thing coming up, and would you like to come with me, because people might like you to sign it too, because you did the cover and everything. And she's always, oh no. It's like she doesn't want the recognition or whatever. But I agree with you. I think it's beautiful. I think she did an amazing job. And again, I'll pass on that compliment to her. I really appreciate that.
I had another question, but I just forgot it. Oh, between all those different fish, you talk a lot about your rainbow fishing, your grayling fishing. Do you have kind of a favorite place, favorite fish in Alaska, or do you pretty much, they're all different and you like different aspects of each thing?
I get asked that question actually a lot, and it's a tough one to answer because they're different in their own respect. And for instance, in the chapter that I talk about, I just refer to it as my grayling home water. I'm not going to name the particular stream or the stretches of stream that I'm fishing. And I talk about how when I first started fishing that water, I actually had a bit of a chip on my shoulder about it, because I had just come back from guiding at Katmai, and you're catching big rainbows, incredibly strong fish. And so to catch grayling just seemed kind of anticlimactic or whatever else. But as I spent more and more time up there and just kind of really started getting into kind of the grace and intricacy of a lot of the dry fly fishing that's to be had up there, there's something very special and very unique about it. And the more that I do it, the more that I love it. And so there's a big part of me that would say, catching a nice grayling on a dry fly, up on that upper section of drainages that I fish, it's pretty hard to beat that. But then I look at some of those big rainbows that you're catching on beads down at Katmai, and it's pretty hard to beat those too. So I think it just depends on where you're at and what you feel like. But there's definitely numerous special fish in numerous special places to be had up here, which is one of the great things about Alaska.
Yeah, the grayling dry fly fishing is kind of nice because we do all this dredging with big streamers and things and beads for rainbows and salmon, and then to tie on a dry fly, and kind of like, we're both from the western states, so we grew up dry fly fishing, and so it's kind of nice to get back to roots that way, where we can throw a dry fly and watch. It's something unique to watch the fish actually come up and rise, where we don't get that too much with the salmon.
Very much so.
Stuff.
Yeah. Anybody else have any questions?
There's a question in the chat from JR. He says, any memories of Howie that you can share?
It's funny because I was just talking to a gal. I had to meet a gal at the coffee roasters place today that had wanted a couple copies of the book. And we ended up talking about Howie. I never had a chance to fish with him, which I really regret. But I did spend a fair amount of time when he still had his fly shop in there, just talking with him. And just, what an outstanding soul. I mean, the guy he's one of those kind of guys that you could never imagine him being, angry or yelling at somebody. He always seemed to have such a nice disposition, a great sharer of information. He was never the kind of guy like, well, this is my stream, I'm not going to tell you about that. He was always very free to let what methods were working for him or what he'd figured out with respect to certain stretch of stream or certain fish. Just a really nice guy. I think it was certainly, in fact, it's what I was telling this gal Jennifer today. I felt like it was kind of a huge blow to the Fairbanks community when we lost him, because just having that knowledgeable of a guy running his own fly shop here in Fairbanks, it's like, to me, ideally, that's what every community needs. They need that guy and that kind of fly shop kind of anchoring things together. And I don't feel like we really have that right now. So a wonderful man. I sure wish he was still around.
I never went to his fly shop or anything, but I feel like Big Ray's here in town does a good job, but I have no reference to place it. So I never met Howie. Or was his shop was it the one on College Road?
He was on College, and then he moved it over. He was off University for a while over by that quilting place. But definitely a guy to be missed.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, JR, for that question. Anything else, guys? Before we do it, I'll just do a random number generator for this fly rod. Looks like most of the folks here probably don't need another fly rod, but
You never have too many fly
we can do
rods.
that anyway. And then the person that gets the number can decide whether they want to keep it or pass it on or just donate it to the banquet or whatever the case might be. So I'm just going to do a random number. Hopefully, I guess I should say less than the number that's on here. 5. Okay.
So he
One,
got
two,
number
three.
5. So down on his
That's-
thing is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Is that Evan?
Evan, Evan,
Brashear.
you want a 2/8 gray?
Yeah. Yeah, I would love a 2/8 grayling rod.
Okay, cool. So I don't know if you saw it earlier, but
It's actually a very pretty rod. I'll tell you that right now.
yeah, so it has no markings on it. It's not like a commercially made rod. It's made by by John Olson, who is a club member. I did not know him, but he passed away recently, and his widow donated these rods and was hoping people could use them or the club could use them. So I'll get a hold of Jim, I guess, Evan, or you, and be sure to get that rod to you if you'd like to accept it.
Yeah, I would. I'll be sure to get it out and chase some grayling with it.
Awesome.
And yeah, thanks for the presentation. It was really great. Especially your kind of description of the community in Fairbanks and talking about grayling especially is something everybody loves to talk about, the rainbows. And they are big and they are fun, but I mean, I've born and raised here in Fairbanks, so grayling is what I grew up on, and I definitely also have a soft spot for them. So I always love when they get some attention. They're probably some of my favorite fish.
Yeah, well, congratulations on the rod, and thanks for the kind words. It was definitely my pleasure to do the presentation.
Hey, thanks again, and I'll make sure Evan doesn't break that rod too quick.
It's a 2-piece, so it's a unique rod. Hopefully it's real sturdy and hard
Yeah.
to break. We'll see. But
Hey, and the other thing is that we just went, the whitefish up there on the chat. That would be kind of interesting to hear, like the biology and all that sort of stuff, because I think that in Fairbanks that's one of our least tapped into resource as far as fishing, because you can catch them on a fly rod. It's not easy, but there are people out there doing it, and I think that would be kind of cool to hear from biologists, just sort of how they end up where they are, and actually that would be kind of a fun subject to talk about, like who has, I know I've I've targeted them on a fly rod, and it's not easy, but why can you catch them like down at the outlet of Paxton so easily, and then they're as tricky as they are on the Chattanooga and stuff. But anyhow, I do thank you again for your presentation. I appreciate that. But I was just I heard you, Kevin, saying that we're looking towards something regarding whitefish, and I think, boy, that would be great, because I think they're like, we don't hardly anybody fly fishes for them, and I think that that's a hell of a resource, because they're there from end of August up until they're pretty thick there right now.
yeah, that's a great suggestion, Jim. And I think it would be, I suppose, since whitefish aren't kind of your classic fly fish species, wasn't sure if the membership would be interested in something like that, but I hope they would be. It'd be cool to. I was just emailing Andy Griska, who's a fish and game biologist here in town today, about a study he just did on broad whitefish in the Minto Flats and Tolovana and stuff. So he might be a good guy to approach. He's also a grayling expert too. But I think that's a great idea. And for our next meeting, we'll definitely consider that. I'll try to get somebody like that in the next couple of meetings. I think Will had an idea for somebody for next month's, but I think that's a great suggestion. So I like whitefish myself. I grew up catching like Rocky Mountain whitefish, and then you occasionally pick up a round whitefish here on the Chena or whatever. So
The only time I've ever caught whitefish has been incidentally when I'm fishing for something else. I've never targeted them. And I don't know if it's sacrilege in this group to talk about it, but one of my more interesting memories from back in college here, 30 plus years ago, was a couple of different times we'd go up and do the spearfish fishery, but with lanterns at night up on the Chattanooga, which always was really cool. And it would be interesting just to learn, like you say, more about the biology. And what's going on with the population up there. Why do they end up where they do, and how long are they in there for, and everything else.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would love to figure out how to actually catch the darn things if you wanted to, because yeah, you see them in there all the time, and it's pretty difficult to get them to bite on anything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we just went spearing, I think, it's 10 fish. We went and took 10 fish, and they're rather delicious. And I know that when we go fishing with Fred won't let us eat any grayling. And if we're camping, that's what we end up eating is whitefish. And whitefish it's actually very good eating,
Yeah, no,
Um,
I think they're underrated. They got that really
Yeah.
nice white flaky flesh. And then, even shefish are awesome too. So
And I had no idea that there were even broads in the system, because I know there's, Cisco's and rounds and the humpback, but the broads, I've never seen a broad in the Chattanooga, but they do exist down in the flats themselves, huh?
yeah, so I was interested in that too, because I was out at the village of Minto a few weeks ago, and there was a guy that was setting nets at the boat launch, and he had these like 10-pound broad whitefish in there. Like, where the heck did these come from? Do they spawn in the area? And so I kind of looked it up, and Andy had this study he hasn't published yet, but he had some results that show that those whitefish they just stay in the Minto Flats in the summer. They go up a little bit into the Tolovana, and then they actually either go out to the Tanana River downstream of Nenana, or the Yukon downstream of Beaver to spend the winter and spawn in the fall. So it's pretty
Okay.
cool what they found out with these radio tags. So
Yeah,
something like that would be awesome for him to talk about, show some maps, show what they do. But yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting, because Evan brought home a few whitefish because he was working out at Bethel on the Kuskokwim, and he brought home a few fish. And just for shits and giggles, he brought home a couple whitefish, or broad whitefish, that they couldn't deliver to the community on a couple days. There was weather that they couldn't get the boats out, and and so we ate a couple broad whitefish, and oh my God, they were absolutely delicious. And they have they've got like a ½ inch of fat on the
Right.
whole front of their heads. And I was
Mhm.
like, wow, what a unique fish. I've never really considered or seen it. So I would really like to hear more about that fishery.
Yeah, they're weird looking. They're really real. I mean, just like the name, they're super fat, kind of broad, this puffy head. It's pretty funny. So. But yeah, they're underrated. Us Alaskans are kind of fish snobs, when it comes to food fish. So some people overlook the whitefish, but I think they're great.
I did the Fish and Game survey, angler survey on the whitefish spearing in Chattanooga in 72 and 73. It was quite
Wow.
a spectacle back in those days.
That's super cool, Dave.
There were literally hundreds and hundreds of people out there, and there was no limit. And people are actually bringing back gunny sacks full of them.
Holy cow.
Mhm.
It has changed a lot now. I guess, things kind of got overfished for a little bit, and now they're limiting it, and it seems like it's sustainable now. So that's good. I was going to ask you, so since you've been in Fairbanks for such a long time, have you kind of noticed the town, like the character of it change much? Like the place where I grew up drastically changed. A lot more tourists and property values went sky high, but it seems like Fairbanks has been pretty stable for quite a long time.
Fairbanks has actually been remarkably stable. Certain areas have grown, like on the north side of town, it seems like things have kind of grown up, while other areas have kind of deteriorated a little bit. But I think the combination of having, the military bases here, Wainwright and Eielson, and then with the university, I think has kept it pretty just kind of stable. So yeah, I mean, overall, I can't say that it's a lot different from, when I was going to school here quite a few years ago. And that's one of the things, frankly, I like about it is it's not Anchorage, so that's why I'm here.
Do you think there's more people fishing now locally than there was when you first kind of were starting, or?
To me, it sure doesn't seem like it. And I guess all I can offer just anecdotally is that the places that I go up that I like to walk into and fish on some of our different local streams, very rarely do I ever run into another person on the stream, which, and given the quality of the fishing up there, that blows me away. It totally blows me away that a lot of these areas just aren't pounded. And I guess it's because some of them are, catch and release only. I know a lot of people don't like to go fish where it's catch and release, but I'm not seeing a huge influx of fishermen up here. It seems so,
That's good.
Which-
Yeah. I mean, like on the Susitna or Kenai, it becomes
Yeah.
nuts and the fish are all
yeah.
oftentimes have hooking scars and stuff. You really very rarely see that here with the
Yeah.
railing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you might not see anybody, like you said, in the day if you go to a place that's not, too well known.
Yeah, I think the people here who fish the interior, again, should really count their blessings. I mean, there's a lot to really be grateful for up here, especially like when I travel down to the States. If there was a stream like we have here locally, once some of our catch and release waters, if there was a stream like that down in, the road system in Colorado or Montana or whatever, it would have hundreds of people on it in the weekend. I mean, it would be so different from what you see here. Amazing.
Yeah, we have a few gems locally for sure.
Yes, we do.
Cool. Anybody else have anything? Okay, well, if nobody else chimes in, thank you, Dan, for talking about your book, and folks, definitely consider picking it up here locally. It's a great read, great gift too, as the holiday season comes up for any people that like Alaska, like fly fishing. I think it pretty much universally kind of draws those sorts of folks in. So yeah, so appreciate you guys tuning in. Evan, congrats on the fly rod. We'll get that to you. And hopefully we'll see you guys next month. I think so we do the second Tuesday of the month typically. And we'll send an announcement about who, or if we're doing a meeting next month, it'll be virtual again. But thanks again, Dan. Really appreciate you talking about your book today.
Thank you, Kevin, and thanks everybody for your questions and your attention. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thanks for the great presentation.
Oh, thanks.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dan.